They're coming. Get down. Now. This isn't a scene from a movie. This is real. 4 armored trucks moved before sunrise. No journalists. No cameras. Just men, weapons, and fear. Hours later, only 1 truck was found. Burned. Empty. No bodies. No survivors. The world never got answers. And those who asked too loudly, disappeared just as quietly. What happened next was worse than death. A silence spread across towns like smoke, choking children, splitting families, erasing entire communities from memory. People spoke in half sentences. Doors locked before sunset. No one saw anything. No one remembered anything. No one dared. Because this wasn't random. This was organized. Precise. Designed. A message written in fire. We own the night. This is the shadow war of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. A cartel built from meth, fentanyl, and ruthless expansion. A force that grew teeth faster than governments could blink. A machine that buys loyalty with bread, and enforces it with blood. Towns rise under them. Towns fall under them. And through it all, one name sits at the top like a ghost. Not seen often. Not recorded clearly. Spoken only in whispers. Carefully. Quietly. As if even the air is listening. The world thinks it knows this story. But headlines are only surface level, ripples on deep water. Beneath them lies something colder. Something the world wasn't meant to see. Something buried in darkness. And you are about to see it. Tonight, you will walk through the war men refuse to speak of in daylight. You will witness how an empire rose in silence, and how fear became currency. By the end of this story, you may not see the world the same way again. Because what happened to those missing trucks was only the first move in a war no one was prepared to fight. Stay. Listen closely. The silence is about to break. Long before headlines, before governments took notice, there was only silence. Silence, and empty fields under scorching sun. In those fields, small villages eked out a living. Farmers rose before dawn. Children walked dusty paths to school as roosters crowed. Life was simple. Quiet. Predictable. But when the old cartels crumbled, torn by internal war, betrayed alliances, government crackdown, a vacuum opened. Into that void crept ambition. Quiet deals at midnight. Money hidden in farmhouses. Weapons moved under cover of darkness. People said nothing. Trusted no one. Kept their windows locked. Because they didn't know who knocked. From the shadows rose a name seldom spoken out loud. A name wrapped in whispers. A name that would soon reshape everything. In the beginning, it started small, a smuggled shipment here, a quiet drug run there. Methamphetamine labs hidden in mountain cabins. Money laundering in small-town businesses. They didn't invade with guns first. They crept in with temptation. With cash. With drugs disguised as relief. With offers that seemed too good to refuse. Villages once proud of their small farms and hard work, started hearing of quick money. Fast wealth. Bags of cash. Some accepted. Others refused. But few dared refuse twice. As the deals grew, so did the power. They didn't need to show force, not yet. Because fear can be subtle. Fear can be quiet. Fear can arrive in the shape of a black envelope slid under a door, an unmarked white van parked outside a home, a whispered warning to keep quiet. And gradually, towns stopped questioning. They started obeying. Then came the first flashes of violence. Not big massacres. Not yet. But kidnappings. Disappearances. Young men vanishing overnight. Witnesses too scared to speak. Mothers left waiting at doorways. Fathers staring blankly down empty roads. Children too young to understand why their playmates never came back. No death certificates. No missing persons reports filed. Just rumors. Whispers. Fear. Slowly, the world outside forgot these places. Forgotten by media. Forgotten by authorities. Erased by fear. But the power grew. The money flowed. The group, the cartel, transformed. From scattered smugglers into a pyramid of command. From kids with small arms and cheap deals, to hardened operatives with military-grade weapons and eyes that knew how to kill without blinking. And at the top, a ghost. Not often seen. Not often named. But always felt. A name carried in trembling lips. A name that promised control. Obedience. Survival for those who bowed. Death for those who did not. By now, the people living in those towns, the farms, the mountains, the valleys, they no longer lived under hope. They lived under dread. Their lives became ruled by unseen orders. Unspoken rules. Who they greeted. What they bought. Where they walked. When they spoke. The world outside heard little. Saw less. But inside those zones, a new law had taken hold. And it would soon extend far beyond small towns. Narrator, quiet, heavy. This was the birth of a monster. A monster that did not roar. It whispered. A monster that did not march. It crept. And now, its claws were digging deep. Somewhere far away, borders still lay intact. Governments still pretended to believe in order. But in the shadows, the rules had changed. The war had already begun. Fog swirled through the alleyways like restless spirits trapped between brick and shadow. The city felt tighter now, less alive, more watchful. Luca kept his head down as he pushed deeper into Crescent Wharf, but every step seemed to echo too loud, like the streets themselves were listening. He found himself replaying the night of the deal, the flash of steel, the shout, the body hitting wet concrete. He didn't mean to kill the man. It was an accident. But accidents didn't matter to men like Casimir. To them, blood was debt. And Luca owed more than he could ever pay. A siren wailed somewhere behind him, close enough to feel like a warning. Yet Luca didn't break his pace. If he stopped, he'd think. And thinking only made the fear worse. He reached the old shipyard fence and ducked through a rusted gap. Inside, the world was colder, quieter. The skeletal cranes hung like dead giants. This was where he was supposed to meet Mira, if she came at all. He paced the shadows until footsteps crunched behind him. Mira emerged, breath sharp, coat dripping with rain. For a moment neither spoke, just two ghosts facing each other, memories thick as the mist. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You sent the message," Luca replied. "Said you had something I needed." Her eyes softened, not forgiveness, something heavier. Regret. "I can get you out of the city," she said. "But the price. Luca, you won't like it." The silence that followed hurt more than any bullet. She told him about the ledger, Casimir's ledger. Names, dates, payments, the kind of evidence that could uproot an empire. But it wasn't just business written in ink. It was blood. Every missing person, every payoff, every body buried beneath Crescent Wharf. And Luca's name was in it. His throat tightened. So that's why he wants me dead. Mira nodded. You were never just a loose end. You're a liability. If you disappear cleanly, no one asks questions. She reached inside her coat and pulled out something small and cold, a keycard. The ledger is locked in his tower, she continued. If you get it, we have leverage. Enough to negotiate your life, or burn his whole operation down. Lucas stared at the card in his palm. One problem, he said quietly. The tower is a fortress. Mira didn't smile. That's why I brought someone else. From the darkness, Milo appeared, ex-military, stone-faced, jaw set like welded iron. Lucas stiffened. They had history. Bad history. But tonight, survival outweighed pride. The plan was absurd. Break into Casimir's stronghold, steal the ledger, walk out alive. But Luca knew something Mira didn't. He didn't want leverage. He wanted revenge. Night bled deeper as they approached the tower. The building loomed like a monolith carved out of smoke and iron, Casimir's pride, Crescent Wharf's curse. Security lights swept across the courtyard like hungry eyes. Inside, every hallway pulsed with danger. Milo disabled cameras like he was disarming memories. Mira whispered directions she shouldn't have known. Luca kept watch, one hand on the gun he swore he'd never use again. Each floor climbed felt like a heartbeat closer to death. When they reached the vault level, footsteps thundered behind them. Mira froze. Guards. 6 of them. Milo moved first, silent, efficient, brutal. Luca followed, though each blow felt heavier, like violence dragged him back into the darkness he tried to outrun. When the final guard fell, Luca didn't celebrate. He stared at his shaking hands. He was becoming what he feared. But they pressed on. The vault door hissed open, revealing rows of steel drawers, one marked with a golden symbol, Casimir's insignia. Luca unlocked it. And inside was not a ledger. It was a photograph. Casimir with Luca's brother. Alive. The world tilted. Noise vanished. Breath dissolved. Myra's voice cracked as realization hit them both. You weren't just a target, she whispered. You were bait. Before Luca could move, the alarm screamed. Red lights exploded across the vault. Milo swore, grabbing Luca's shoulder. We have to go now. But Luca stood frozen, eyes burning into the photograph. His brother, dead for years, or so he believed. Casimir lied. Casimir stole him. Casimir used him. Something inside Luca broke. He didn't run anymore. He turned toward the elevators, toward the rooftop, toward the man who ruined him. Toward Casimir. Casimir was waiting on the roof, framed by thunderclouds and city light glow. His smile was cruel, familiar, haunting. You finally came home. Luca approached like a storm given legs. Rain lashed sideways. Helicopter blades churned the sky. Betrayal tasted like blood. You told me he died, Luca growled. Casimir shrugged. A lie is just a tool. And you, Luca, you were my sharpest blade. Lightning split the night. Luca stepped closer, voice shaking with rage. No more. The city held its breath. In that moment Luca wasn't prey. He wasn't dead. He was an accident. He was reckoning. The night was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a world holding its breath. From above, satellites traced the earth with cold mechanical eyes, mapping the spread of something too large to name, too hidden to stop. On those maps, routes glowed like arteries, pulsing red, alive, feeding something vast. Roads that didn't exist last year were highways now. Whole valleys carved open like wounds. Somewhere in the dark, an unseen engine roared, a war machine built in silence. There were villages no longer printed on maps. They existed once, full of homes, markets, laughter, and then they didn't. No headlines. No alerts. Just smoke rising where life used to be. In one village, the only living thing left was a dog wandering between burned door frames, nose pressed to ground where children once played. The sky above it looked bruised, a dull purple haze from the fires still smoldering under collapsed roofs. Some places didn't even leave bodies. Only black earth and silence. Children learned what gunfire meant before they learned to read. Doors splintered at midnight. Men vanished without footsteps to trace. Women dug graves with kitchen spoons because shovels drew attention. The cartel didn't just move narcotics, it moved borders. Where they drove, paths hardened. Where they stayed, towns disappeared. Every route became a scar across the continent. Every scar carried product, weapons, bodies. To the locals, they were the silent storm. You never saw it forming, but you knew when it passed. Because everything after was gone. Documents surfaced years later, hotel bookings with no names, invoices with no item descriptions, military escorts filed as training exercises. Behind doors with no reporters, uniforms shook hands with shadows. After each meeting, the checkpoints waved convoys through. After each handshake, another journalist disappeared. After each agreement, bodies washed up along rivers like warnings. One reporter followed money trails for 6 months. Bribes disguised as development grants, weapons classified as research equipment. He never got to publish. They found his car upside down in floodwater, windshield unbroken, seatbelt still tight. Official cause: accidental drowning. Locals whispered otherwise. Accidents don't shoot men twice before the water takes them. Government spokesmen denied corruption. Military blamed local extremists. Yet villagers swore soldiers walked side by side with cartel gunmen, rifles polished, uniforms immaculate, convoy dust rising behind them like a funeral procession. 2 armies. One purpose. Power didn't change hands. It shared gloves. Inside the cartel, the real war was not with law enforcement or rival states, it was with itself. Ambition bled more men than bullets. Generals vanished mid-meeting. Lieutenants were found headless in irrigation canals. Accounts were wiped, ledgers burned, family homes emptied overnight like ghosts had carried them away. It wasn't one cartel. It was a kingdom eating itself alive. Loyalty lasted until profit changed direction. Brotherhood ended when eyes lingered too long on power. Paranoia became oxygen. Betrayal became a weapon. No one slept more than 90 minutes at a time. One high-ranking commander once ruled 3 states. He arrived at headquarters for a strategy briefing. No one else came. By nightfall, neither did he. Not even his teeth were recovered. A single heartbeat bass beneath the voice. We see blurred footage. Night vision cameras overlooking a dirt airstrip, pallets of sealed crates, men loading them into trucks without plates. Whispers recorded through walls. The kind of whispers that ended dynasties. Everyone knew something catastrophic was coming. They just didn't know when. The war was there. Beside highways, under power lines, inside quiet border towns. But unseen, unacknowledged, unspoken. Invisible does not mean imaginary. It means protected. And then, one mistake cracked everything open. Static. A red light flickers. A forgotten audio recorder begins playback. 3 voices speak, low, confident, unhurried. 2 are cartel lieutenants. The third is unmistakable. It is the defense minister. Laughing. Planning. Choosing which village will be cleared next. Not negotiated. Not spared. Cleared. A drone photo fades onto screen. Not censored. Not blurred. Hundreds of bodies. Laid in rows like a harvest no one will claim. A massacre the world never reported. A war governments helped wage. A truth buried under silence, until now. The recording stopped. The drone image lingered on screen, bodies like rows of unspoken truth, and then the visuals cut to black so suddenly the viewer feels the world fall out from beneath them. The silence that followed was unnatural, like the air itself was holding something back. And then a new image faded in. Not a massacre. Not a battlefield. Just an ordinary street, somewhere quiet, where nothing extraordinary should ever happen. Because that was how the worst night in the history of this war began. Not with gunfire. Not with explosions. Not with chaos. It began with normal. It was a morning like any other, vendors arranging fruit crates, children in uniforms walking to school, old men sweeping dust off storefronts. Women exchanged gossip across balconies. Radios played soft music. Sunlight fell warm across pavement that had no idea it would soon run red. Nothing felt unusual. Not until whispers arrived like a draft under a locked door. A rumor first, a checkpoint unmanned. Then 2 gas trucks passing without license plates. Then a convoy seen near the hills, lights off, engines barely breathing. Not panic. Not yet. Just a shift in the air, like animals sensing a storm humans cannot see. By noon, phones stopped ringing. Not all at once, but like falling dominoes. Signal fading, returning, fading again. Messages frozen in mid-sentences. It felt like the world was breathing through a cracked straw. People looked up from their routines. Shops closed shutters quietly. Not because danger was visible, but because everyone felt it. Somewhere beyond the horizon, engines stirred like distant thunder. And then at 4:12 p.m., just as the last bus of the day turned into the main road, everything changed. The first explosion wasn't loud. It sounded like someone dropped a dumpster. But birds fled the rooftops in a single wave, and that was the sign. Something monstrous was coming. Weapon trucks rolled in at sunset. Black. Covered. Silent except for engines rumbling deep like earthquakes under pavement. Men stood on beds of trucks, faces masked, rifles slung low, eyes searching like predators walking through a herd. Doors slammed across the town like a single heartbeat. Children were pulled into houses. Shutters dropped. Lights flicked off. The night didn't fall, it swallowed. What happened next didn't feel like war, it felt like erasure. Street by street, the town folded in on itself. Phones dead. Power cut. No radio. No internet. No way to call for help. Gunfire started like sparks, small, scattered, then building, growing, multiplying until it was impossible to tell where it came from. Every direction became danger. Every window reflected fire. Every second stretched like a lifetime. Narration breathes heavier now, the way survivors described their own lungs tightening, each inhale tasting like smoke and iron. Mothers hid children under floorboards. Men barred doors with furniture. Wind carried screams from blocks away. The night cracked open. And no one, not one, could run. Some tried. An elderly couple attempted to flee through the back road. They didn't make it past the abandoned field. The next morning, there was nothing left but tire tracks. Others hid in drainage tunnels, holding each other in silence, praying footsteps above did not pause there. Entire families packed into bathrooms, holding towels to mouths to muffle breaths. Some cried quietly into sleeves. Some didn't cry at all, they were beyond crying. The horror did not come like a shootout. It came like a slow tightening rope, pulling, crushing, suffocating. Shots came closer. Boots scraped pavement. Doors split under sledgehammers. Rooms were searched, emptied, lit only by flashlight beams slicing through dust. Some people were taken. Others simply disappeared, leaving beds still warm and tea still steaming. And just past 3 a.m., as gunfire thinned into occasional echoes, something worse arrived. Silence. Not peace, the kind that follows screaming. The kind that means the night has already chosen who will live to see sunrise. Before dawn, bodies disappeared. Not buried. Not recovered. Gone. A cleanup efficient enough to feel inhuman. By sunrise, blood had been washed from main roads. Cars towed. Windows replaced. Only burn marks on cracked pavement hinted at hell. When citizens tried to speak, microphones were cut. Cameras shut off. A press release stated no violence was recorded last night. But hundreds were missing. And no one was allowed to ask where they went. Families who reported missing relatives were visited. Police interviews never released. Journalists vanished one by one, articles removed, archives wiped, cameras seized. A mother who lost her 2 sons was told. They were never registered. You never had children. The town was silent now, but not healed. Silence was the grave. This was not just the worst night of the war. It was the night proof became more dangerous than crime. A night too deadly to document. A night the world was never meant to see. And that is why this documentary exists. Because the only thing more terrifying than what happened is how close it came to never being remembered at all. The violence of that night did not end when the gunfire faded. It stained the soil, the rivers, the wind itself. Days passed, but people in that region didn't speak about what happened, not even in whispers. It was as if language itself had been buried with the dead. And yet, stories leak the way blood leaks through torn cloth. A gesture. A glance. A trembling voice that never rises above a whisper. I returned to villages that existed only on paper now, places where children once played, where music once echoed from rooftops, where life had rhythm and color and pulse. Today, doors hung open with no one behind them. Clothes still on washing lines, stiff with dust. A table set for dinner that no one would return to. These weren't just ghost towns. They were wounds that refused to close. And it was here, in what remained, that I found the first pieces of truth. At night, a man met me behind the shell of a burned-out community center. His hands shook, not from age, but from memory. He didn't want cameras. He didn't want his real name spoken. His voice, when it finally emerged, was like gravel dragged across concrete, slow, strained, as if each word carried weight. We survived, he said, but we did not live. He described the hours after the massacre, the smell of smoke, the metallic taste of fear. Soldiers patrolled the streets, not offering help but erasing what remained. Bodies removed before sunrise. Phones confiscated. Anyone asking questions taken away. Not arrested, taken. Full stop. The implication didn't need to be spoken. This wasn't just cartel warfare. This was a cleanup. And then he told me something that still keeps me awake. We were told to forget. But forgetting is harder than dying. His eyes never left the ground. I spoke with others, women hiding behind curtains, a farmer who refused to stand near windows, teenagers whose eyes looked twice their age. Every sentence came like a confession carved out of bone. They spoke softly, as if sound itself might trigger death. No one expressed anger. Only exhaustion. Exhaustion from remembering. Exhaustion from surviving. A woman, her voice thin as thread, told me she kept a list of missing neighbors in a notebook under her bed. 73 names. Children, teachers, mechanics, a pregnant woman who sold tortillas in the market. Most towns don't even have 73 residents left, but she keeps writing names anyway. If I stop writing, they will disappear twice, she whispered. Her notebook is a cemetery in ink. The files came next. A journalist, exiled, anonymous, his face known by no one, contacted me through a one-use email that vanished after opening. No greetings. No signature. Only 5 attachments. Each labeled with dates that matched the night of the blackout. I opened the first file. A report, stamped with government logos, half redacted, lines blacked out like a crime scene under fog. But what wasn't blacked out was enough to freeze my pulse. Operación Limpieza. Civilian presence acceptable collateral. Media containment priority level red. Not cartel language. Military language. The second file was worse. Aerial surveillance screenshots, grainy but unmistakable. Convoys. Bodies. Fires. Radio logs referencing coordination with civilian irregular units. In plain words, cartel integration. The state and the cartel weren't at war that night. They were partners. The third file was a list of names. Politicians. Officers. Judges. All connected by arrows and underlines. All beneficiaries of something only referred to as Route 41, a corridor that stretched like a vein across the map from port to border. If the map was the body, Route 41 was the artery, pumping money, weapons, and captured territories like oxygen. Cut the artery, and everything bleeds. Protect it, and you own the country. The fourth file included audio fragments, radio intercepts, brief, chaotic, terrifyingly calm. Voices speaking in code but betraying awareness. Civilian interference minimal. Package secured. Proceed to purification. Purification. That was their word for it. Not a battle. A cleansing. But it was the final file, number 5, that shifted this story from tragedy to treason. A video. Shaky. Grainy. Recorded through a dirty windshield, distant figures barely visible. But there was no mistaking it, trucks with military insignia escorting vehicles with no plates, men in tactical gear and men in civilian clothes riding side by side. Same weapons. Same radios. Same direction. Police, military, cartel, moving as one organism. The man who sent the files included only 8 words in his final message. Truth survives only when someone risks killing for it. No signature. No trace. He disappeared as suddenly as he appeared. And now the pattern was clear. The survivors weren't silent because they forgot. They were silent because truth had become dangerous currency, worth more than life, traded only in secret. But even as I pieced together testimonies, files, fragments of evidence like bones scattered after a storm, one question kept scraping against my ribs like glass. If this story is forbidden, if survivors speak only in whispers, if files vanish before dawn, if governments erase their footprints with bulldozers and bullets, Then how did these recordings reach me? Who risked everything to send proof into the world? And why now? Was this someone inside, a traitor to power? A conscience cracking under weight? A ghost who wanted his death to mean something? Truth is a wound. And someone, somewhere, chose to open it again. I don't know where the whistleblower is. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know if this video will be taken down, or if someone is already listening in the walls. But what I do know, what you now know, is this. Silence is never empty. Sometimes silence is full. Full of things too loud to speak. And so I end Act 5 with a question we cannot ignore. If this story is forbidden, where did these recordings come from? The truth isn't lost. It's hidden behind the people who still dare to whisper it. Truth rarely explodes. It seeps. Slowly. Patiently. Like water under a locked door, silent, unstoppable. And when it finally breaks through, it doesn't ask permission. It was dawn on my 9th day in the region when my phone vibrated, one message, no words, just a location pin. A place deep in the mountains, unreachable by paved roads, far from anything resembling safety. The timing was strange, almost deliberate. Not late enough for night, not early enough for morning, the hour where even shadows are unsure whether to stay or disappear. I hesitated. Then I went. The air changed as I climbed. Thinner. Sharper. The smell of pine mixed with something else, something metallic, something old, like history rusting in the open. I walked until the path ended, where the forest swallowed the sky, where the quiet was so complete it felt like stepping into another world. And then I saw it. A cabin. Small. Unmarked. Half swallowed by vines and time. No smoke from the chimney. No footprints in the soil. A place that didn't want to be found, and yet someone led me right to it. I pushed the door open. Inside, dust floated like ghosts in pale light. Papers on a table. Maps pinned to cracked walls. Radio equipment still humming with the heartbeat of distant static. Whoever lived here left quickly, or expected to return and never did. And in the center of the table, wrapped in plastic, sealed tight, was the final file. Not digital. Not emailed. Not something that could vanish with a keystroke. Physical. Weight heavy enough to change the world. I held my breath and opened it. The first page was a report. Different from the others, not military, not government, not cartel. It was personal. A name was written at the top, not redacted, not blurred, not erased. Colonel Arturo Medina. A high-ranking military official. Respected. Decorated. Seen shaking hands with presidents in photos, seen saluting during parades, seen as a protector of the nation. But this file, his file, shattered that illusion like glass. It detailed meetings with cartel leaders. Payments disguised as infrastructure budgets. Orders issued under the guise of national security. And then, the smoking gun, instructions for Operation Limpiza. He didn't just know. He gave the order. The massacre was not collateral damage. It was policy. My pulse hammered in my ears as I turned the pages. Each sheet cut deeper, signed authorizations, direct communications, handwritten notes acknowledging cooperation with the CJNG. The cartel and the government were not two sides of a war. They were two hands of the same body. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came in the second half of the file, a section marked confidential in red ink so deep it looked like dried blood. It contained transcripts. Interviews. Psychiatric evaluations. All about the same man. Medina himself. At first, it made no sense. Why would a powerful official keep records of his own undoing? Why create evidence that could destroy him? Unless he wanted someone to find it. Because on the final page, scrawled in a handwriting that trembled like a man writing through fear or guilt, were 8 words that made the room tilt under me. Truth must outlive the men who bury it. Medina wasn't just complicit. He was the leak. The man responsible for the bloodiest operation of the war was also the one who left the trail of breadcrumbs. Not to save lives, but because something inside him broke. Power corrodes, but guilt corrodes deeper. He built an empire of silence. And then handed someone the key. I realized something chilling. The leak didn't come from a rebel. It didn't come from a journalist. It came from the architect of the dead. The truth was never smuggled out of corruption. It was born inside of it. But revelation is never simple. Truth doesn't expose one monster, it exposes every shadow attached to him. As I read deeper, the story twisted again. Medina's notes described not remorse, not conscience, but fear. He wasn't leaking because he wanted justice. He was leaking because something had turned against him. A faction within CJNG, younger, hungrier, less loyal to old alliances, discovered that Medina was the bottleneck. He controlled the routes, the shipments, the silence. He was a gate. And gates can close. So they planned to remove him. But Medina learned of the betrayal before they struck. And in his panic, he gathered evidence, not to confess, but to bargain. To survive. He recorded meetings. Copied files. Collected proof like ammunition. If the cartel moved against him, he could expose them all. Government. Military. Politicians. Commanders. He created a kill switch. Not justice. Insurance. And then, it happened. The young faction attacked. But Medina escaped. Not far. Not for long. The file included a final dated entry, written 2 days before the massacre. If they find me, this archive must speak for me. If history remembers nothing else, let it remember that I warned the world. So the massacre wasn't revenge. It wasn't conquest. It was cleanup, but not of civilians. Medina was the target. The civilians were the cover. And when he vanished into the mountains, the operation expanded. Towns burned. Files destroyed. Witnesses erased. The country didn't watch a war, it watched a purge disguised as one. Everything we thought we knew, flipped upside down. Medina was evil. Medina was guilty. But Medina was also the only reason we know the truth. A monster became a messenger. The architect became the leak. The villain became the witness to his own crime. Feels wrong to say it. Feels worse to realize it's true. Because now one question eclipsed everything. If Medina leaked the evidence, where is he now? The answer came not from a human voice, but from a radio. As I sifted further through the cabin, the dormant equipment crackled back to life, static thinning into words. Faint. Broken. But undeniable. A voice speaking coordinates. Repeating them. Over and over. Coordinates leading deeper into the mountains. Not a warning. Not a distress call. A beacon. Someone was still alive. Someone wanted to be found. The weight of the discovery pressed against my chest like stone. Medina's leak wasn't a statement, it was a trailhead, pointing to a man buried in his own sins, waiting for the world to catch up to him. I packed the documents. Took the files. Memorized the coordinates. Even as fear gnawed like wolves inside my ribs, I followed. Hours passed through forest and fog. I crossed ravines where only birds had witnessed footsteps. And then, a clearing. A ruined safe house. The roof collapsed. The walls blackened by fire. Bullet holes like constellations in charred wood. And in the ashes, a body. Unrecognizable. Burned beyond identity. But beside it, untouched by fire, wrapped carefully in cloth, lay a military badge. Arturo Medina. His leak wasn't a plea for survival. It was his suicide note to history. He leaked the truth because he knew he wouldn't survive the purge. He leaked because the new generation of power wanted him erased, and he refused to vanish quietly. The truth we follow today, every witness, every file, every image, exists because a man who built the war couldn't stand being forgotten in it. And so he ensured the world would remember. Even if it remembered him as a monster. When I lifted the badge from the ashes, something tightened in my throat, not grief, not pity, but the realization that truth is never clean. It is tangled. Brutal. Human. Medina wasn't hero or villain. He was both. He was neither. He was the leak. The war we thought was chaos was actually surgery, a regime cutting out its own aging organ. The massacre wasn't a mistake. It was a reset. A new generation rising from bodies like soil. And now, at the end of everything, at the edge of silence, only one truth remains. The world never saw this war. Because the war was never meant to end. It was meant to evolve. To shed its skin. To replace itself. We didn't witness a cartel collapsing. We witnessed a generation change. Power didn't break. It simply changed hands. And Medina, the man who built the machine, became the first part fed into its gears. Holy. *T. The stomach drop moment isn't just that Medina leaked the evidence. It's that his death didn't end the war. It birthed the next one. Because now new leaders rise. New routes open. New purges begin. And somewhere, someone else is already watching, already recording, already preparing the next leak. Because in the world of organized power, truth is not justice. Truth is a weapon. Medina's leak was only the first shot. A story like this never ends when the screaming stops. It ends in the silence that comes after. The kind that settles over a place like ash. Refusing to be swept away. For weeks after Medina's body was found, the mountains felt like a graveyard of unspoken things. Snowmelt carried the last traces of fire downriver, small flakes of black that once were photographs, uniforms, histories. Somewhere downstream, children may one day skip stones over water that holds secrets heavier than rock. But what haunted me most wasn't the ruins. It was what came after them. A whisper. A rumor. A pattern. Because once you know where to look, silence becomes a map. Every road in those mountains led to the same realization. The massacre was never meant to be remembered. And the leak, the confession, the proof, the corpse, was never meant to be the final chapter. It was the opening act of whatever comes next. Behind burned buildings, new construction began. Quiet. Efficient. No permits. No press releases. Just metal beams rising like bones where homes once stood. Training fields. Communications towers. Roads cleared not for families, but for supply convoys. At first glance, it felt like rebuilding. But rebuilding for who? Villagers were not returning. Their homes were left unclaimed, grass growing tall through empty windows. Yet the infrastructure, the arteries of power, pulsed stronger than ever. It hit me like a punch to the lungs. The operation didn't destroy the region. It claimed it. This was not aftermath. It was takeover. A new system rising from burned soil. Cartel? Government? Both? Neither? Power had shed its skin again. And somewhere inside that metamorphosis, Medina's leak wasn't just confession. It was transition. The man who built the machine left blueprints behind. And others were already using them. I drove to the place locals feared most. A crossroads known only by rumor. Where convoys never stopped, where headlights never dimmed. Where watchers in the hills carried rifles like extensions of bone. I did not carry a camera. Not a recorder. Not even a notebook. If I was searched, I needed to look empty. Unimportant. Forgettable. Because sometimes the safest truth is the one you hold only in memory. I waited through the night as engines growled through darkness, men moved like shadows, and crates were traded with the efficiency of surgery. Not chaos. Routine. A system polished to shine. The war hadn't ended. It had matured. Where there were once chaotic firefights and blood in the streets, now there were contracts, schedules. A clockwork of silence. This wasn't cartel warfare anymore. It was governance. A government without elections. A nation without borders. A power with no face. And then I saw him. Not Medina, but someone dressed like him once was. New uniform. New insignia. The same authority, reborn. He signed off shipments with casual indifference, like approving school supplies instead of weapons. A new generation's commander. Younger. Sharper. Untouched by guilt. The future didn't look like chaos. The future looked organized. And that realization carved into my spine like cold steel. The leak was never meant to destroy the machine. Only to upgrade it. Days later, more files surfaced. Not leaked by Medina. Not left in a cabin. Sent intentionally, to select journalists, activists, international monitors. Not to expose crimes. But to justify ascension. The narrative twisted once more. The leak was being weaponized. The message was implicit but unmistakable. The old guard was corrupt, brutal, sloppy. They needed to fall. We are the new order. Truth wasn't freeing the nation. It was marketing. Proof of betrayal became proof of power transfer. Massacre became mandate. Silence became strategy. And we, the audience, were never outside observers. We were the witnesses they needed. The truth wasn't revealed to stop the machine. It was revealed to validate the upgrade. Holy sh*T. I realized then that the story was not about good or evil. Not justice or crime. Not victims or perpetrators. It was about inheritance. The passing of power like a blood-stained heirloom. Medina's leak wasn't an act of redemption. It was his final contribution to the machine he created. His death was the ceremonial gate opening for the next generation. A changing of the guard. The war CJNG didn't want the world to see. The world sees it now, because seeing it serves someone. Every massacre has an author. Every leak has a buyer. Truth came out not because the world deserved to know. Truth came out because someone needed it known. And we, by hearing it, became part of the architecture of power. Information isn't revelation. Information is currency. And we are all trading in it. I returned to the last village still alive. A place where mothers slept with shoes on in case they had to run. Where toddlers learned silence before speech. Where teenagers looked at mountains like grave markers. I asked an old man what he thought of the leak, the documents, the video, the confession. He looked at me, eyes fogged with memory, and said something I'll never forget. The truth is beautiful only to those who don't live beside it. Truth didn't return the missing. Truth didn't rebuild homes. Truth didn't unburn the dead. Truth only illuminated what survivors already knew. Power doesn't end when exposed. It evolves. And here, in this valley of ghosts, the future of the war felt inevitable. As natural and cruel as weather. Months passed. Authorities issued statements denying everything. Networks dismissed it as conspiracy. Files disappeared as quickly as they surfaced. But we know better. Because once you see the machine, you can't unsee the gears. Medina was one gear. He is gone. The machine runs smoother now. The men in new uniforms are younger, faster, hungrier. The routes are more efficient. The disappearances more subtle. The control more complete. This region isn't at war anymore. It is governed. Not by ballot. By blood. The war the world wasn't meant to see is no longer hidden. Not because it was exposed, but because it became too large to conceal. And we stand now at the edge of a revelation that feels like standing on a fault line moments before shift. The leak wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. A quieter one. A smarter one. A more patient one. And history tells us something unsettling. Quiet wars last longer. I left the mountains with everything and nothing. Hard drives. Documents. Coordinates. But also questions that sleep with their eyes open. What if Medina isn't the only ghost in this story? What if the next leak is already underway? What if the goal was never to hide the truth, but to shape who controls it? Because truth is not light. Truth is leverage. And someone now holds it tightly in their fist. So here, at the end, we ask ourselves, was this a revelation, or an induction? Did we expose a war? Or enter one? Because now you know. You know the alliances carved in shadow. You know the purge disguised as conflict. You know the architect who leaked his own empire. You know the system that survived him. And knowledge is dangerous. In places like this, truth doesn't set you free. Truth puts you on a list. Which means this is not closure. This is not finale. This is ignition. The story ends here. So another can begin. Not with armies or explosions. But with whispers. With files. With a leak that grew teeth. Somewhere out there, a new Medina is rising. Young. Connected. Hungry. And he has learned the single most powerful lesson this war has written in the bones of mountains. You don't win by hiding the truth. You win by owning it. So this is where we leave you. Not with answers, but with awareness. Inside this war, the truth is alive. It moves. It adapts. And someday it will leak again. Not as confession, but as coronation. The war CJNG didn't want the world to see. Was only the rehearsal. So here we are. Hours of names with no faces. Stories that still bleed when spoken. Whispers that should never have reached us, but somehow did. You've seen enough to know this wasn't just history. It wasn't just crime, or power, or borders drawn in blood. It was people. People who woke up on an ordinary morning, and disappeared into a chapter no one was supposed to read. And now you know their world. The Invisible War. The night where reality split open. The survivors who still wake up gasping. The truth that slipped through one crack, one leak, and landed here, in front of you. But this story doesn't end because the video ends. It ends only when enough people hear it. When sharing becomes resistance. When silence breaks, even just a little. So if you're still here, if your chest feels tight, if your mind won't stop replaying the voices, if you're questioning what else has been buried out of sight, don't let this story die. Share this video. Comment what you felt, what you fear, what you refuse to ignore. Hit like, not for me, but to push this farther than a government, a cartel, or a signed document ever wanted it to go. And if you want to walk deeper into stories the world tried to erase, subscribe right now, before the next thread pulls loose and everything unravels again. Because as long as you're watching, as long as you're listening, as long as you come back for part 2 of what they swore would never surface, they haven't won. This was one voice. Now it can be thousands. Maybe millions. Maybe enough. So I'll leave you with one final question, the one that should keep the world awake tonight. If this was only one leaked story, how many more are still buried in the dark?